Hey everyone, Arshid here. We're back for another GAMSAT podcast. The topic of today's discussion is the online GAMSAT fair? My guest for today is Scott. Many of you know him as Scott Fraser. Do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, Scott?
Yeah, thanks, Arshit. So I'm Scott Fraser, or Dr. Scott Fraser, as some of you might refer to me as. I am someone who's been working in the GAMSAT space for well over a decade now and have been exposed to the evolution of the GAMSAT over that period of time. Hopefully that is of some use in today's discussion.
Nice. Good to have you on, Scott. I mean, it's kind of formal over here, but Scott and I see each other every day. So the banter will be coming out throughout the rest of this podcast, that's for sure.
Indeed.
Sweet. All right, let's get straight into it. I think the best question to set up the context before we actually tackle is the online GAMSAT fair, which obviously is a very difficult question to answer because a lot of people have different opinions, a lot of argument happening on all the forums, like a lot of students raising up things, other students saying other stuff. So it is quite a big question. But I think the best way to maybe set up the context is maybe let's talk about the evolution of the GAMSAT over the past 3 GAMSATs, right? So I've been doing this for like roughly 5 years. I think yourself 12 or probably even more.
Yeah.
For most of that, it was paper form. You go in, mostly like the race course in Flemington if you're based in Melbourne or wherever you're based, you have your venues. You go in there, good few thousand people come in, sit the paper-based exam. Everyone does it on the same day. Everyone goes home, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
do you want to tell us a little bit about how it evolved from that into May 2020 and then into September 2020? What were some of the changes we saw? Obviously, we know the changes were because of COVID, coronavirus. I don't think we need to get into the details of that. I think all of us have enough information on that, but maybe I'll let you go with the evolution.
Yeah, sure. So I think of all of that, the part that I think most people don't fully appreciate or maybe even know is that online testing is something that ACER themselves have always seen as being a more reliable form of testing. So GAMSAT is one of the few tests that isn't delivered in a digital format or wasn't delivered in a digital format to that point. If you look at their cachet of other tests, online testing is something that they definitely believed in.
Yeah.
So if you were being very objective in your assessment of whether there was a future where the GAMSAT would be online, the very simple answer is yes to that. COVID merely gave ACER the push that meant that they had to go there, probably in a timeline that they weren't so ready for, as opposed to would it have ever gotten there. So we do need to take that into account when we assess the equity or the fairness in and around the exam. Yeah. It was heading this way. Digitisation of education is coming in. We're seeing universities now release different models around their education, more towards online and digital.
Yeah, and I remember a couple of years, you actually, I think it was probably like late 2017, you kind of brought up that point. It's like, hey guys, I feel like the GAMSAT's going to go online over the next 5 or 6 years.
Yes.
I remember a couple of the others, just kind of giving you a laugh and carried on, with their drinking their kombucha. I'm pretty sure that was me. But
yes.
I definitely agree with that. Like now looking back at it, it seemed like it was the direction that they were always going to go. It's just that this obviously sped things up, probably in a way that we weren't ready for in terms of the broader cohort, as well as maybe they weren't ready for. But it's something that we've always seen coming.
Correct. And we categorically weren't ready for it as a cohort.
Yeah.
They weren't as ready for it as they should have been. There are other models out there they could have at minimum copied in order to make the May exam a smoother experience and what have you. But the idea that digital testing offers more robustness of data, better ability to discriminate in what is a data-heavy test, and that's the primary thing they are concerned with there. Online always served that better than in paper. And, you can be subjective all you want around that, but it was always headed that way.
Yeah, sweet. Cool. So do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about the May 2020 exam? What were some of the issues there? How that like how that changed from the paper-based exam. What were the major changes we saw? What were the major issues students faced? And yeah, just some of your general thoughts on May 2020.
Yes, I think there's three big areas that shifted. One is it went from sort of, as you mentioned before, a one-day exam all around the world, just one day, everyone's doing it together, to a breadth of exams over a range of different dates. And indeed, in May, they split up Section 1 and Section 3 as well. So spreading the GAMSAT over a larger period was something that was quite new, whereas they do that in other exams like the UCAT and what have you, and the UK CAT. So it's quite established, but that was disjointing. The other obvious disjointment was the shift to an online test. That is very different in the way that you approach it compared to a paper-based test. So students had been building skills around annotation, etc., maybe also for some of us dedicating a lot of time to getting our handwriting right, to make sure that Section 2 is legible, that type of thing. And now a lot of those techniques and strategies we'd been thinking about weren't as relevant, or potentially were completely irrelevant. So there was that aspect as well. And then I think finally there is that other element that was present in May, which was the proctor. The proctor, whether we'll never see an outward answer or response to this from ACER, and neither should they. But that was a very differentiating experience for a lot of people, and I think that's also why we saw further changes as we headed towards September.
Yeah, because just from speaking to heaps of the students that we have at Fraser's, I remember the experience was really different for all of them. Some people came in and they were like, it was so smooth.
Yeah.
Came in, did my exam, everything went smooth, no hiccups. When I got dinner with the proctor maybe as well, it was just like a completely smooth experience. And then there was one other I think the craziest story that I heard was one of the students had a 3-hour delay, and then they just told her that she's not doing it today. And then they didn't get back to her for like 2 weeks or something like that. I was like, that's crazy. Like I'd go like a little bit nuts over those 2 weeks. I can imagine. So yeah, it was something that was really just a variety of experiences, right? And that's why into September we saw that shift from a digital exam that people do at home, where it's proctored, to a digital exam that people do at test centers, similar to the UCAT, if I'm correct, where you go to a place and the computer's there. Similar to also, actually, most digital exams are done at test centers.
Correct.
I know there's a few really high-level ones that people do that they proctor, but like most of the ones that I've seen are digital centers. Anyway, do you want to explain a little bit about that shift and what that looked like, some of the implications of shifting from May, the format there, to the September 2020 format, which obviously was just a month ago, and results just came out, 2 weeks ago now?
About that. I think the shift to September, we saw in real time ACER learning what works and what doesn't. And whilst, again, like I said, there'll never be any sort of an outward statement saying May was unfair, if you do want to extrapolate between September and May as to things that could be deemed having impacted people's performance, look at the change between the two. That's, I think, everything is right there. So the proctors are gone, and it's not really an option anymore. You must get to a test centre. So that was a huge variable, as you said. It was anxiety causing. ACER would argue from their perspective that the part of the proctoring that you did where you weren't being affected by the proctor is still enough to measure you by. And technically they're right, but I think also if you actually had them kind of speaking off the record, then why haven't they kept going with the proctor? Like it was too much variability that it's not like it advantaged or disadvantaged people. It was more that it could actually disrupt people, and you don't get a true representation of them. So moving to a test centre, which the UCAT, UK CAT, so many other exams use, was a really good move. It also meant you could introduce the actual supervision that you used to have in the written exam. So that person's there invigilating at the centre, watching over people, checking that they're using their scratch paper appropriately. that all of your various stuff is on the desk as it's meant to be. So that's a bit of a win there as well. The other thing they obviously did though was also just deliver the exam on one day. So they split it up. In May, you had your section 1 and 2 sitting, then you had to book a separate section 3 sitting. Booking headaches aside, that clearly retrospectively was not the world's best plan. And doing it just in one sitting in the digital environment at a test center has led to a more consistent experience for the student, and thus we would expect the outcome to be more representative of their actual ability in the test.
Yeah, sweet. No, I think those are some really good points. So I guess now let's get into the juice of the actual podcast, the question we're all here to talk about. And the way that I've been thinking about it is it's not a yes or no answer. It's multiple yeses and multiple nos, depending on like a specific element of the question. But anyway, the question is the online GAMSAT fair, right?
Yep.
And maybe I want to break it down into a few different things, both pertaining to September and to May, so we can take some time to ease into it and tackle each of it, right? So I think one that we've talked about quite a bit already, and maybe we'll just talk about it for a few more seconds just to finish talking about it and leave it, is the proctoring, right? So final verdict, proctoring in the May GAMSAT, Hadouken, yes or no, was it fair or not?
It was not.
It was not.
Only because the definition of fair is that it should be equitable across the board, and it wasn't an even experience. So no.
Sweet. Cool. I didn't want to put you on the spot with the yes or no answer, but I know the people at home are looking for it, so thought I might as well do it. So proctoring, I agree completely, and I think that's why they've scrapped it. It's done. Unfortunately, I kind of empathize with ACER. You kind of empathize with everyone during the whole COVID situation. Things weren't easy. It's just
the other thing about proctoring, it's a bit of an aside, but if you do it well, it should cost a lot of money. And I think it's fair to say that, ACER were also under some financial constraints as well. So they didn't maybe invest the dollars per head on the proctoring as what you would in some of those higher end tests where they still do proctoring, and you're paying thousands of dollars per person for that. But that's because you want that experience to be robust. So the economics played a role as well.
Sweet. Anyway, I think we're done talking about proctoring for this session. I feel like we all agree that it was kind of unfair, but it's done, and I feel like ACER have quote unquote recognized that, and that's why it's gone.
Yes.
So the next one, this one is maybe a little bit more controversial.
Sure.
I'd be really keen to hear your insight, and kind of we can your insight at home as well. Drop your comments, reach out to us. We'd love to continue the conversation. But this one is one of the biggest ones, I think. So you have a lot of students, they come in after the exam, and I'll use section 2 as an example because one of the section 2 tutors, they come in and they're like, oh, it didn't go great. I got bureaucracy and I don't know, nothingness as my 2 themes, right? Those are 2 pretty brutal themes. And they're like, my friend yesterday got democracy and love. If I had democracy and love, I guarantee you I would have scored a 75, right?
Yep.
So where's maybe I won't put you on a yes or no spot this time, because maybe this one's a little bit more nuanced, but this whole factor of students getting different questions and different themes on different days.
Yes.
How do we tackle the fairness, so on and so forth? Because I know you've personally done you've done courses within standardized testing. How do they standardize it, and is that fair? That's the big question.
It's like 17 questions in there.
It's like that scene from Scarface where he walks out and he's like, I dreamed it would end this way.
Yes.
Questions everywhere.
Bang, bang, bang.
Go for it.
So it is fair. And there's, I'd say, 2 easy macro ways to deal with this without having to dive into the mechanics of standardized testing. One is that the paper-based GAMSAT, there were already multiple GAMSATs in circulation. So even though around the world everyone was sitting this at the same time, obviously without time zone difference, but it's not like exactly the same paper was going to every single person. In fact, within every test center, there were multiple papers going around. So section 1 and 3, getting different questions, is absolutely consistent with the way the GAMSAT already was. So there's no deviation there. We're just having to dip into, I would say, a deeper pool of questions to ensure that variation from day to day over a broader window is taken into account. With section 2, similar sort of thing. You did hear of multiple themes going around. Not as many as what you would have in the online window, but you would often hear people saying, yes, I had this, or someone else in another city going, oh, I didn't have that, I had this for section 2. So you do get multiple themes. What it tells me, especially for section 2, is that students need to be ready for anything, whether it's their strength or their weakness. And for those of us that have sat the exam multiple times, we know quite well that the type of score you get in section 2, there is a bit of variability from sitting to sitting. Like someone doesn't go in and just go 81, 81, 81, 81. And some of that variability is attributed to how well you're going to resonate with that particular topic. However, you're being marked on your communication skills and your writing. So that should be, to an extent, an inherent thing that you possess that can be adapted to the theme, irrespective of what it is that you get. And as a result, I think the bigger thing that students should be reflecting on from that is, what is their range of potential score that they could get in section 2? If they are a type of student that ranges from 55 to 75, they should be probably concerned about that, and in the lead up to their study working on that, because that's too big of a range to feel comfortable that you're going to go in and do well. There's a lot of dependencies there. Whereas if you're a student that maybe sort of swings between 80 and 70, that's okay. Or even 70 and 60, still also okay. You have a high and a low sort of circumstance, and hopefully you can do everything you can to get into that higher circumstance. So I think the lesson to come out of that is the range. Now, the other thing that you kind of touched on there was some of the underpinning theory around how is this fair and how is this equitable in standardized testing. And it is fair and equitable. We can easily calibrate questions from one test to another, so that if one test is, in inverted commas, easier than another, then that can be factored in. Equally, if the range of questions was potentially advantaging one question set versus another, that can be factored in. That's actually quite commonplace. There's some really nice mathematical models that do that quite easily. So ACERs are employing all of those and have an even more advanced algorithm to deal with that. So there will be equity across sections 1 and 3 in that sort of fashion. And of course, section 2, it's triply marked. So that gives you a degree of objectivity that should ensure that your mark there is representative of your communication skills. So I can understand why people feel upset that they didn't get something that absolutely plays to their strength. But like, your strength and my strength aren't the same either. So you're also, like, it's a pretty big reporter bias to be saying, oh, so-and-so got this, I would have crushed it. How do you know they liked that?
Yeah, awesome. I actually think that's a really good point, right? The whole idea of strengths and weaknesses, right? Because like, where the fairness comes in is, like you mentioned, you don't really know what everyone else's strengths and weaknesses are. The example that I used with like the student who got bureaucracy and nothingness, and then the other student who got democracy and, I don't know, I think I said love or whatever I said.
You did.
Maybe that student who got democracy and love would have been like, oh man, I wish I got bureaucracy and nothingness, because that would have been so easy for me. So at the end of the day, it's like, you're not going to go interview every single student, all 15, 20,000 of them, and find out if they got lucky, in quotation marks, or unlucky. And it's just kind of pointless, right? Rather, what you should be doing is focusing on how you can actually execute, right?
You get what you get, and you don't get upset.
Exactly, right. And it's like, it's the same with life, I guess, as well. It's
That's
like,
what I tell my kids.
I mean, like,
Yeah.
there's an element of that, right? How can you make the most of what's in front of you, right? But let's not let this get into some sort of a self-help podcast.
The parenting podcast will be coming out soon.
Parenting podcast. That's definitely something Scott would do. Scott got the dad bod for sure. I got mine coming over here as well, but
Working
table
on it.
is coming.
Summer's near.
Summer's near.
Yep.
Brutal. Sweet. Anyway, next, so I think we talked about proctoring.
We did.
Talked about strengths and weaknesses.
We did.
To me, there's two major other points that I wanted to discuss in relation to fairness, right? So the next one was digital centers, right? So what are your thoughts on digital centers and everything that comes with them, the shift from proctoring? I think that people see it as a lot more fair. Is that your opinion? Is that whole issue of all the problems that stemmed from the proctoring, has digital centers and people going in person to do the exam digitally, has that solved all of those problems? And what are some of the problems that have maybe arisen from digital centers, if any? I remember there was the example of, I don't know if it actually happened, but students in Adelaide not actually being able to sit the exam. Yeah. Is that unfair? How do we work around that? What are some of your thoughts on digital centers? I don't think it's as controversial as some of the other points, but I thought we'd talk about it because it is something that students have pointed out.
Yeah, so I think digital centers are extremely fair because they're really well controlled.
Yep.
And they get around / mitigate all of the issues that previously existed with a proctor. So, internet consistency, invigilation, all of that stuff is present at a testing center. Thus, I see, like, if you're complaining about a testing center, I would question your rationales. But what you were talking about then that affected the Adelaide sitters, that wasn't really a testing center issue. Again, that came back to COVID and the lack of empathy that came from ACER towards some of those people who were booked in for a place like Melbourne where they literally couldn't travel, and then told that they couldn't shift to, for argument's sake, Brisbane or Perth, or in fact, I think Sydney was the only place that was open to them. And then we're also being told that they wouldn't get a refund. So that was more of a, like, that's not a test fairness issue. That's a lack of empathy / sympathy from ACER issue. And those things you need to approach in a very different way. So, yeah.
Sweet. I think that answers the question. And yeah, I'd agree as well. It doesn't seem to be a fairness issue with the test itself. It's more like, how did ACER handle the broader circumstances? Yeah. I think, to me, overall, digital centers seem to be the perfect solution to all of the problems that came from proctoring. So hopefully, and it seems like this is the direction that ACER are going in. But anyway, we'll get to that point later. The final point when it comes to fairness, and I guess this is maybe we could call the most controversial one, is the phenomenon of cheating in the GAMSAT for the last two, the May GAMSAT and the September GAMSAT. What are your thoughts on that? Did a lot of it occur? Not that much? How much of effect should it had? And more importantly, how should students think about it, right? I think that's the most important question. Anyway, cheating as a whole, feel free to tell us what your thoughts are.
Oh, I want to break this one down too. So there's like, in September at the test centers, you can't cheat. So to anyone that's been working under the assumption that they read on a forum or a Reddit post that someone found a way to cheat at a test center, I just put zero stock in that. There's so many different ways that can be monitored and controlled.
Surely you could just write the answers on your hand like the good old days.
Surely. But no, I think there was some concern around May. Again, I don't give it a lot of validity because proctoring is pretty good at locking your screen off from external programs. So even if you have found a way to have other programs running in a screen, so you've lied to your proctor and you've got another screen running, your cheeky screen, whatever it is, and you're trying to pull text across, you can't Control-C, Control-V into those text fields. So the people that say they found a way to do it, et cetera, they're a handful of people. And again, I wouldn't put, for people that behave like this, I wouldn't be putting a lot of stock in what these people say either. So these are your fake news types, very unethical just by their own behavior and nature. And I think that's the big question that's at the base of this. I've said it a couple of times before on previous podcasts that we shouldn't be worried about cheating from people that are heading toward this type of a vocation. The people that cheat will cheat anyway. They'll find a way to cheat. That's in their nature, and quite frankly, they shouldn't be heading down any sort of a career path that has to do with high levels of integrity and ethics and what have you. So they shouldn't be a teacher, they shouldn't be in volunteering, they shouldn't be in the allied health space, because clearly the way they make decisions is governed very selfishly and very unethically and immorally. So putting your stock in what people like that say, I think that's more feeding into the anxieties and what have you in and around this test. It's not factually accurate. So yeah, I don't believe there were enough people that could have swung the scores such that the results in May reflected cheating. You're effectively buying into a Trumpian style logic based on some huge assumptions. And look, why not throw the Kennedy assassination and the Ukraine into this, because they have about as much factual relevance to this as what it does to that actual situation there in the US, just by way of analogy. So going forward, and I think that's what's really important for people who are listening to this, going forward, whatever slight unfairnesses existed have been mitigated and are gone. This is a very, very robust way to test. The data should be more robust in an online setting as opposed to scanning sheets and issues with handwriting and what have you. So I would feel very confident that the test is going to do the job. I think then what we need to do is try and adapt to make sure that we do our best in the conditions of this new test and stop living in the past of the paper test.
Nice. I think, to me, one of the most important points you raised over there in relation to cheating is that even if there might have been a few of them in the May exam, which it's hard to tell if there was, but even if there was, it definitely wasn't enough to swing the bell curve, right? If you scored a 65, you were going to score a 65 whether there were cheaters or not, right? If you scored an 85, it's definitely wasn't enough to make that swing, right? And again, for all of us out there who actually want to get into medicine, be a good doctor, and don't want to do it in an unethical or dentistry, and don't want to do it in an unethical fashion, this is it's not even something we should be taking into consideration. So what? There's a few people out there who tried to game the system, probably thinking about how cheaters approach it. It probably didn't even work for them, because they probably had some templated essay that they copied and it probably went terribly or something like that. Or they had some theory and they thought the theory would help them for section 3, but then they realized that, okay, so what, this textbook that I have open on, I don't know, whatever topic it is, it's not actually going to it's just going to waste my time more likely, right? So I'd say for all of those who are pondering, wondering, stressed about it, don't be. It's past, it's done now, and it didn't have too much of an effect on you. Rather just carry on with your process, doing your study as best as you can and executing in the way that you can, right? So I think that's a pretty good discussion on, is the online GAMSAT fair? We tackle those 4 major areas, and I think the conclusion that we came to is, while the May 2020 exam had quite a few issues, ACER has done a pretty good job to mitigate those issues.
Very good job.
And move forward into developing something that's more fair. And hopefully they'll keep doing that, because again, this is a pretty big hurdle for people who want to get into medicine, right? And we want it to be as they want it to be, and all of us want it to be as perfect as possible. But maybe let's discuss next what you see what you see the direction of the GAMSAT being. Is it staying online? I know ACER have mentioned that. What are your thoughts at a general level on the direction that's the GAMSAT's taking?
Categorically staying online. There's no reason to go back. In fact, all of the reasons to go back are bad reasons, very subjective reasons. ACER was always going to go in this direction. They're here now. They've been adjusting and making improvements. It's staying online, and this is the GAMSAT. So yeah, we had a solid, 20 odd years of working in the paper format and preparing for a paper exam. A lot of people had put a lot of stock in preparing in that way, and now you've got to pivot to online.
Yeah. I'll tell you one thing I'm not going to miss is all the printing that we had to do.
Yeah.
It was so much effort. Like, you would come in and one of our employees, he's like basically head of logistics for printing across all the cities. Yeah, I think he's the most happy with the change. He's like,
He smiles so much
I don't have to
more.
come in
Yes.
and just look at, and for all of us who've worked with printers before, for some reason they're like the stupidest machine, right?
Well, they will break down when you need them the most.
Exactly. It's like
Yeah.
humanity has created these amazing computers, but these printers are still like functioning like they're from the, 1920s or whatever. So
Yeah.
that's a positive for us at least, right? Anyway, let's discuss the maybe kind of like bring it all back home. The online GAMSAT, is the online GAMSAT fair? How should students now think about, and like this is a huge question, right? We're not going to answer all of it in this one session, but just a few pointers in terms of, with these changes, how should students now change the way that they think about preparing for the exam?
Well, you're right. That's a really huge question. But at the same time, we're not going from point zero. There's a lot of analogous tests out there that we can look at as to how you prepare and what skills translate really well to that online test setting. So a really good example is the UCAT, where, yes, you can be very good at a lot of the stuff on paper, but at the end of the day, there really is a big performance difference between practicing in the environment of the UCAT and being aware of how to use all of the different tools like flagging, the calculator, et cetera, that will drastically improve, pardon me, that will drastically improve your performance compared to if you're going in there and that stuff's a little bit sort of off-putting. So it's not just about changing your strategy, removing things like annotation skills or what have you, thinking about how to use the scratch paper. It's also about the actual environment. So one of the things and one of the reasons we did so much printing was that people really wanted to practice in a format, in a setting that mimicked the GAMSAT. And we did that. We did that very well. So now we need to be able to do the exact same thing, but with the online exam. And this doesn't just mean putting questions online in any format. You've actually got to be something that's similar to the actual GAMSAT, so that when you're in that setting online on the day, there is an element of familiarity and of comfort there that means you feel like you can execute your plan. Because if you don't have it, executing the plan becomes significantly harder.
100%. I really agree with that point. And I think that was a pretty big question. And we actually are going to be doing another podcast probably across the next 2 weeks to discuss that specific question, because that question definitely needs its own podcast. How does a person study for the online GAMSAT? What are the ways that they've changed? Just wanted to get like a little bit of insight, but keep an eye out for that. That's something that we'll be doing, and it'll be really in-depth, breaking down everything.
Am I on that?
We're still figuring out after today's performance. I don't know. It's like Scott, we're gonna have to let you
go in another direction.
It's like see you later, sir. Anyway, I think this has been a pretty great podcast. But just to finish off, now that we've kind of discussed it, and again, would really love to hear your thoughts in whatever format. Feel free to comment, send us a message, whatever. Keen to keep the conversation going. I wanted to finish off by, you talked about simulation, right?
Yeah.
Making sure that when it was the paper-based exam, you'd go to a setting that was a really big venue, try to, with as many people as possible, try to like, it's a mock exam, right? You don't want to,
we used to lock our students out. Like you couldn't come in early, and that made people uncomfortable. Good. It was meant to simulate the real deal.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right. You want it to be it's a mock exam, so you want it to be as close to the actual
Yes.
the actual feeling, right? So I know we've been in the May GAMSAT, we pivoted to online with ACER, and now we've been working on this pretty big project. I know you've been involved in it, making sure that all of our resources, all of our mock exams, just our whole system fits in with what ACER is doing as close as possible.
Yes.
Do you want to maybe give those at home a little bit of a sneak peek at, just in the way that we're talking about it, about what to expect, what the platform looks like, and how it went, what the process was like?
I mean, yes, I do, but I think the challenge was getting all of the peripheral details of the actual sitting environment to match the actual sitting environment. There's plenty of off-the-shelf solutions you can get for LMSs or question banks or what have you, and literally all of them are nothing like the actual GAMSAT. So yes, you can put your question there, but it's just it's a strikingly different aesthetic, and the way you move through the questions, etc., the pause between shifts, all of that sort of stuff, it's not there. So we spent a lot of time on the aesthetic, on the actual design, and then of course we spent a lot of time on taking all of the printing and putting that into an online format as well, so that even our classes are now built around the online environment, but building the skills for that environment. So that was pretty impressive. I guess the final thing that's been probably a really nice advantage out of that is that we can now monitor a student's progression towards mastery. And this is something that really couldn't be done elsewhere or prior to this. But now that we have, over time, data that's evolving and growing as people either go through the courses or even if they're self-directed, before we could very easily pick the gaps, but now we can match the gaps to the mastery and see whether you truly are a master of a particular area of study or a question type or what have you, or whether it's a bit, like I was saying before, there's too much of a range and variability, and thus you can work with someone to make sure that you fix that, or of course work in your own study groups to try to understand what it is that you need to implement to make sure that really is an area of mastery. So there's a lot of feedback built into this now that makes it an extremely intelligent online system.
Awesome. And it's here for our March programs as well. That's the good news for everyone, that we're having these systems. People can use them. It'll give us a really good ability to inform the way that you study, and it'll be a really good representation at the simulation level of your preparation as well, making sure that, again, a mock exam is a mock exam, right?
Yep.
It's not just, hey, I chucked a PDF online and there's a Google form a Google form, right? It's like, no, we don't appreciate Google Forms, right? But anyway, that's good to hear. That's awesome. Hopefully all of you will be seeing it at some point, whether hopefully in the course or at some other point you'll all come across it, and hopefully it's something that works out and you all enjoy. Cool. I think that's about it for me. Any final thoughts, questions, Scott, that you wanted to add just in general or about the specific topic that we discussed today?
My paternalistic closing would be that it's okay to be anxious and uncertain around a lot of this stuff, but as your elder, as someone who's now
I like that.
globally one of sort of the top 3 most experienced people in this space, you need to focus on looking forward and not back. The GAMSAT staying online. Ignore everything that's come before this. ACE has done a really good job to shift it to this place. Now just try to do your best in this space. And if you can do that, you'll do good justice to who you are, and hopefully that means that you'll go through to the next stage.
Sweet. I agree with that 100%. I don't think I have much to add.
You don't have
to
a
that.
choice. It's paternalistic.
It's paternalistic. There you go. Sweet. Anyway, I think that's it from us. Thanks for joining us today, Scott. I mean,
Pleasure.
you'll get to walk a few meters from your normal working space, so I don't think it was too much effort. Hopefully you all enjoyed it at home. Again, feel free to reach out to us anytime, and expect more of these now that the GAMSAT season is picking up. We're all kind of getting into the GAMSAT mood. I know a lot of people have just finished their exams. Those who are in university, a lot of the other universities will be finishing across the next week or two. So now is the best time to start getting into it in depth. And yeah, hopefully we'll be there for the ride with you as well. Thanks, Scott.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Arshad.
Bye, everyone at home.
See you guys.